ขอขอบพระคุณท่านนายกสภามหาวิทยาลัยขอนแก่นเป็นอย่างสูงครับ Thank you very much, the Chairman of Konkan University Council. Moving on to our first keynote lecture on structure as sensors, more data learning in big cyber physical systems, which will be given by Professor Dr. Pei Zhang from the University of Michigan, the United States of America. On this occasion, let me briefly introduce Professor Zhang. Professor Pei Zhang received his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering with honors from California Institute of Technology and his master and PhD degrees in computer engineering from Princeton University. His research interest is in cyber physical systems, Internet of Things or IoT, and sensor networks. He developed the ZebraNet system, which is used to track zebras in Kenya. It was the first deploy wireless ad hoc mobile sensor network. His recent work includes SensorFly, or the focus on groups of autonomous miniature helicopter-based sensor nodes, and Mars or muscle activity recognition. Beyond research publications, his work has been featured on popular media, including CNN, NBC, Science Channel, Discovery Channel, CBS News, CNET, Popular Science, BBC Focus, to name but a few. He is also a co-founder of startup Vibrato Tech. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our first keynote lecture, upon this occasion, may I please kindly ask you to switch on all the cameras for a group photo. Sorry for the interrupting. Right. One more time. So could you please switch on your camera and smile for the group photo? Thank you very much. All right, so I think it is about time. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. Pei Zhang.
Hello. Hopefully you can hear me and see my slides. If not, someone should yell out and stop me. Okay. Should I start?
Yes.
I'm going to take the
please.
silence as a yes. Oh, thank you. Okay, cool. Good. That means you can hear me as well. Okay. So today, I'm here to talk a little bit about structural sensors, but mostly about learning and what that means in the real world of sensing. So basically, when we talk about sensing or cyber-physical systems, one of the things we actually are asking is that, how do we understand the physical world? Very simple question, very difficult answer, unfortunately. And one of the things you'll hear as the answer is probably AI, machine learning, big data. And to do all that, I guess first thing you have to look at is really big data, right? And there has been a lot of sensing data work in cyber physical systems. How do you actually get this big data? There's tracking work, there's work in the traffic, there's work on air pollution, smart buildings, retail, medical, all of these type of things to get data. And we have a lot of data. But to give you an idea what that data means, I'm going to give you one example. In this case, is our work, some of our earlier work on zebra tracking. That work, we actually went out to Kenya and tried to track zebras. We got ourselves a few zebras, put collars on them, and collect a bunch of data. And basically, we deploy in a place that's 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers with one base station, put a little radio out there, and we collected a bunch of data. And basically, 3 years of work, we were able to collect 5,000 data points. Now, if you think about it, usually when we're talking about big data, we're not talking about thousands. We're talking about millions or billions of data points. But in the real world, that's what you get. Thousands of data points from 3 years of work. Why is that? Well, animals are hard to get. You got to go and tackle animals in this case. And it's really hard to figure things out and really hard to tranquilize a zebra. So when you look at this little bit of data, from here, each X represents the location fixed from the zebra. Well, you can actually see some information already. Right? Here, you actually see a lot of zebra information where the X's overlap each other. That's where the animals are just not moving. What are they doing? Well, they're eating. And now, how do we know they're eating? Well, because we are working with biologists and they know the behavior of animals. So we were actually able to gain information from such little data. So this particular work gave us a bunch of lessons. Well, one is a seminal work a little while back, but it really exposes the limitation on data. It's really hard to collect data in the real world. And when you do that, you cannot collect a lot of data. To collect a year worth of data, you need a year. And data coverage is really not ideal. Right? To cover the zebras, we actually had to tackle and tranquilize each one. But the key takeaway, though, is that even with such little data, something we can still understand because we have physical understanding of this data beyond what the data gave us. Okay? So, what does this all mean? Well, what that means to us is actually, it's a bigger problem when we're talking about humans. Because, at least we like to believe, humans are actually more complex. We're more dynamic, there's more variability, people speak different languages. There's so much more things that changes for a human. And the human world are actually more limited as well. For zebras, we didn't care about their privacy. But for humans, when we're working with the elderly, they didn't want us to sense them in particular locations, like their bedroom, like their bathroom. Okay? So there's a lot of these concerns that's difficult for you to collect this data. And machine learning, because of this, actually makes it a lot more difficult. Because of this variability, we have the cursor dimensionality. There's so much things that could change. It really requires a lot more well-distributed and labeled data just for the machine learning to actually give you anything reasonable. And again, oftentimes this is really difficult and sometimes just not possible to get. Okay. So what we actually want to do is for these type of applications in real world, we want to create something called this learning from what we call small data by integrating some physical understanding. So basically the idea is that if we could have some sensing environment, we try to optimize the sensing so that we get the most useful information out of it. And then we can integrate a lot of physical models, our understanding of the physical world, physical phenomena, physical equations, with prior information combined with adapted data models. And together, we can actually form some type of thing we call hybrid learning by incorporating all this information. And eventually, we can even update, based on our result, update the sensing and actually give much more information. Okay. So today, I'm going to focus on, I'm going to start with going quickly over optimization sensing, but I'm going to try to give you an idea of the pipeline. So to figure out how, to give you an idea of what we mean and how we incorporate all this information and learn from it. Okay. So one of the other problems, though, with the sensing world is that, well, mostly we have two kinds of sensing, a mobile sensing or a static sensing. Things you put on things are mobile or things that you put fixed. And traditionally, how we collect this data? Well, we collect this data by putting a lot of sensors out there. And frankly, each sensor is different type. And that really creates this huge problem, again, with dimensionality. Each sensor sends things differently, and each different type of sensors will give you different type of information. So again, you need so much more data. And this is actually, the frustration really came, but there was one point when we're doing an experiment, and that kind of opened our eyes to see, well, actually, a few years back, when I was visiting China, before all this pandemic stuff, went to a temple in Beijing. And people were saying that, oh, this temple is the oldest temple, blah, blah, blah. They're trying to show us. And then they said, oh, the temple recently went on a remodeling. I asked them, oh, how recent? And the tour guide said, the Qing dynasty. Right? For building structures, Qing dynasty is recent. But for sensors, how old is the mobile phone? Right? Sensors and buildings have a very huge lifetime mismatch. So not only do you have different diversity of sensors that create problems, your sensor also dies quickly, and that creates more problems. Right? So is there a way that we can sense without all this thing? And this is when we came up with the idea of structural sensors. Namely, when you move around the building, you create vibrations, no matter what you do. A person walking inside the building, they create tiny vibrations. These vibrations propagate throughout the building, and we can capture it by sensing the building. All right. We can use the building as a physical sensor. We reduce the sensor maintenance, reduce the diversity of sensors. But there are challenges. There's more variability and capture a lot of activity. So it's not, we don't all win on everything. Right. So the idea is that when you move around, you create vibrations that propagate through, and we can put a few sensors, either on the ground or on the walls, and these will capture these vibrations. And we can measure everything plus the noise. But of course, the difficulty comes from getting the label data. And it also changes when the environment changes, right? So there's more variability, although we have trade-off from the hardware variability. The idea actually came during one of the experiments when we were looking at structural health. At school, this was back when I was CMU, one of my students was actually measuring the vibration of the building to determine the structural health of the building, whether there's a structural component that had problems or doing an experiment on that. And because there's students working even at midnight, we had to stop the experiment sometime because all those are noise. And we were doing the experiment in the hallway. This student walks through the hallway. We stopped our experiment. He went to the bathroom and came back out. And my student was looking at the data. And she said, he didn't wash his hands. And I was like, what? That's a guy, you're a woman. How do you know that what he did in the bathroom? And she said, well, look at this vibration data. Footstep, 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 enter the door, close the door, toilet flush, footstep, footstep, footstep. He came out. Right? There's no hand washing signal there. But that's when we started realizing all these signals that's actually encoded into the data that we can potentially capture. Okay? So in theory, this might work, but we first need to capture this tiny, tiny vibration data. And my students created a very sensitive sensors, multiple versions of them, trying to capture these very small data. They try to increase the sensitivity by having a dynamic sensing range. So someone walking further away or someone who's walking close, we can also get the maximum data. And automatically optimize sensing to capture the signal, maximize signal resolution, and reduces the structural vibration effect on the device. Okay, let's see what it does. Well, basically here you see the sensor and someone walking by the sensor. And each red box is a detected footstep. Okay, we can capture that, but how well can we do? Well, it turns out capturing footsteps, we're able to do 50% accuracy. That's it. Now, why is machine learning so bad? Well, in this application, we're actually making it very hard for it because there's noise, there's doors, there's machinery, and especially noise. Because what we are measuring is a foot hitting the ground, causing a deformation, creating this tiny earthquake. And if you're familiar with earthquakes, this impact-induced wave actually is dominated by a wave that's called a Rayleigh-Lamb wave. Now, this has a low attenuation rate, which is great for us because that means it propagates really far, so less sensors, but it has high dispersion effect and high material variation. So that's why it's such a bad result, because our sensors are just faithfully capturing the signal, but we really weren't integrating any of the physical understanding. So here I'm going to switch gears and see what does this mean? What does this wave dispersion actually do? So the wave dispersion, what it does is it look at this vibration. Originally you have an impulse that comes in, and then as time goes on, as the impulse travel around, the higher frequencies actually travel faster than the smaller frequencies. So the signal started looking distorted. Give you an idea what we're measuring. Here is two footstep signals. Horizontal is time, vertical is amplitude. And for two different colors are the same footstep measured at different locations. They look so different. Right? And if we actually decompose it, they do look the same, but because of on the frequency domain, they look the same, but because of the shifts, that's why we're seeing such a big difference. So instead, what we can do is actually, knowing this, we can choose a different frequency range. In this case, in the wavelet, they call it scales. So if we can choose that scale, we select the right scales and do the filter signal. Now all of a sudden, two signals look super similar. Right? By having this physical understanding, we have something that's much more similar in one scale. And by looking at multiple scales, we can actually get back the similarity. And with that, our capture effectiveness went from 50% to 99%. But this just means we can capture the vibration. So what? Right? This is about what AI can do for us. So let's see what it can actually do. What can we do with this? So this building of sensors, what can we do? Well, one thing we thought, well, maybe identification. This comes from a meeting I had with one of the military folks. He's a general in the U.S. military. He was stationed in Germany for a long time. He's retired. One of the things when we were talking about this, he said, "Oh, you should do identity." How do you do identity? He said, "Well, actually, when I was stationed in West Germany, this was when the Cold War was still going on. He said the Russians were able to understand, able to determine who the spy were, just based on the way we walk." So what happened? Like how? And he told me that, we've been trained to walk with guns, and those training really is telling when you're actually walking. It's very ingrained in our heads. So we can potentially pick out spies, I suppose. But if you look at each person walking, On the left here is Carlos, my PhD student. On the right is Ning, a master's student of ours. And PhD student, very nervous, gotta publish, gotta graduate. So he's leaning forward and walking really determined. Master student found a job, life is good, not too much stress. She's very relaxed and have a backward center of gravity. And that changes the way they walk. That changes the way the foot hits the ground. And up here, top is Carlos, bottom is Ning. We can see the same thing in the signal that we capture. You can see that Ning's signal has a very big impulse when the heel hits the ground, and much smaller one when the tip hits, toe hits. Whereas Carlos, because the foot is flatter, you see a much difference. So different people walk differently. But the same person, here's 3 examples of the same person, they look very similar. So the same person walks the same. So with that, we did an experiment again and asked 10 people to walk around with 1 sensor in the hallway and just use a classic learning SVM, support vector machines, to actually determine who's who. And with 10 people, here horizontal is number of training traces we use per person. On the vertical is accuracy. As you can see from the very right, the blue line is the step level accuracy, meaning each person, each step, we try to figure out who this person is. But we know that this person doesn't fly around, right? Each step follows the previous step, and it's most likely the same person. So if we make that assumption, that is the red line for the accuracy. And we can reach 99% accuracy with 10 people on the identification. Great, this is wonderful. And we just told people to walk, and then they were able to do that. So we got a little cocky and said, okay, let's do a more free experiment. In fact, we're not going to tell people we're doing an experiment on identity or footstep or walking. We're going to tell people to go get a cookie. Okay? Before we start the experiment, there's a cookie in the kitchen. Why don't you get a cookie? And they walked to get a cookie. And the result dropped to 72%. It's like, well, what happened? Well, we actually observed when the person walked to the kitchen, they were running. It's like, oh, there's cookies. Other people may take it. And on the way back, they're eating the cookie. They're much slower. They're much more relaxed. So the gait pattern actually changed because they're walking at different speeds. Right? Running is clearly different than walking. Slow walk is clearly different. A slow stroll is clearly different than normal walking. So if we look at our data, there's some physical attributes of each step frequency. So here we group our person step walking at different speed into 3 distinct clusters based on speed. 3 distinct clusters, and we plot it based on the speed of that walk. Here, each color represents a different cluster. So you see that, for example, the green only occurs when the person is walking really slow. The reddish orange is kind of in the middle, whereas the blue only occurs when the people walking really fast. That means people have different walking style, different speeds. But we also noticed some other things. Well, one thing is why we're doing so poorly is because we're training on the middle steps, but when they go to get the cookie, they're actually walking much faster. So there's actually a mismatch here. But we also noticed 2 things. One is each type is dominant at different speed, and 2, they change smoothly. So when we actually took the traditional approach, is we have label data and label negative data, person 1 and person 2, and then we draw a multi-dimensional surface across it, classic machine learning. But then the new data that came in actually were different, right? Here you start to realize classic machine learning is developed for Google, where they have too much data. But here we don't have that much data, so we actually weren't able to get the original label data. So my student came up with an idea called the Iterative Physics Attribute Guided Learning. So instead of just learning on one bit, it continuously learned. And then the key thing is that it used a sense physical attribute to control the learning order. So as people come in and start walking, we have more walking data, more faster walking data, more slow walking data. Based on the speed, we'll learn the ones that are closest to our label information first, then slightly further, then slightly faster. Okay? So we're learning based on another physical attribute that we can measure and we can model. And from that, here are the results. On the horizontal is the confidence threshold. On the vertical is ID accuracy. Here, again, at 50% confidence threshold, we're able to actually get around 99% accuracy again, right here. So our identification went up from 72% to 99%. Again, we're pretty happy, yippee. And then we said, well, let's try in the real world. Let's not just try in our university. Let's go out and try in some different buildings. And I think you can see the trend now. And the different building immediately dropped. It's only 63% accuracy. Now what's happening here? Well, here, a similar problem. Well, to understand that, we have to go from integrating the physical models. Buildings are too complex, so we don't actually have a good physical model for that building, to actually adopt data using physical understanding. So what happens in different buildings? Well, in each different building, there's a structural dependent variation. Structural dependent vibration. I'm sure you have felt this too. When you walk around, when you sit around in a wooden building, it vibrates more than when you sit around on the first floor of a concrete building. Okay? And what's happening is that in wood, concrete, steel frame buildings, each one vibrate very differently. So our whatever input that we have, in this case the X is our excitation effect, it's affected by the structural effect here, the H, and what we measure is a vibration frequency response, the Y. So each different structure will give you a different H in this case. So what this means? Well, we need to calibrate and train every single building. So each time we go to a new building or a different part of a new building, now we need to train. Well, that's traditional machine learning. Given that I'm here talking about it, I'm not going to do that. So our solution was actually to do a structural informed model transfer. So here is the idea, is that buildings in essence similar. There are some physical properties of the buildings that are similar. Namely, they have four walls. They all kind of support it somewhat. Now the support may be different, the joint may be different. So we have some available label data on the building that we know of. And we have a structure, a source structure that we don't know of. We have target structure that we don't know of with no label data. And our goal is to find a model, find some way to transfer the source structure with available data into the target structure with no available data. Give you a visualization is of what we're trying to do is that we're trying to understand group A, group B, namely two different people. This difference we call the excitation effect. Right? And in the source structure, this consists of a blob. This blob we call the source structure data. Now, in a different building, this will be a different blob that looks different. And this difference we call the structural effect. So our goal is to find the projection from the left to the right, a space to the left where these two structures are in different spaces. Find a projection where there's very little structural effect, where this data actually overlaps. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we actually derive the transfer function using the structural equation that I showed you earlier. But don't worry, I promise I won't go too much into the equations. This is the only equation that I'm going to scare you with. But the idea here is that we want to find the W, the transfer, that minimizes the structural effect with a regularization term to make it robust to noise and some imperfections. But also want to preserve the distribution shape so that the previous two things will overlap. And of course, we need to constrain the problem so that the label information are still separable in the new space. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless, right? Our whole goal is to separate. So by using this approach, we're actually able to use the label information and use it into a source that we don't know about. So we did some experiment in a CMU Porter Hall. It's a non-carpeted concrete slab on grade. And also on Vincentian Nursing Home, it's a carpeted metal deck floor. And on a Baptist nursing home, which is a carpeted wooden floor. And here are the results. The vertical axis is the F1 score. You can think of it as how accurate it is. And each one, 3 columns. Baptist, for example, is using Porter and Vincentian as the label one, and Baptist as an unknown. Porter is using the Porter as unknown. Vincentian is using the Vincentian as unknown. Each color represents a different way of extracting features, with ours being the last one. So you see, originally we had a 63%. You can see it on the very lower left. But eventually, with our approach, with the transfer, we're actually in Vincentian, we're able to get up to 99% accuracy. Of course, that's up to 29x reduction in error compared to the existing approaches without this data transfer. Okay. So that was a very long-winded way of saying that we have addressed a bunch of, in the structural sensors domain, we're able to capture footsteps, do identification, do different buildings, all with pretty high accuracy, using these different ways of incorporating physical knowledge to the machine learning. In this framework, I quickly talk about the optimized sensing, integral physical models to offset data needs, and of course, the adaptation of data. Okay. Now, I've been asked here to give a talk about what machine learning can do for us. And I still haven't done it. Right? None of these are actual applications where we actually do something useful. So with this, what useful things can we do? Namely, with this building as sensors, what can we understand? Well, let's see what we can measure first, right? So I talked about the identification. We can actually identify a person with 99% accuracy. Now, we certainly have tried to do this with some kind of security type of things, but basically you can imagine identifying someone. I didn't get the time to talk about localization, but because the wave propagates to different sensors at different times, we actually can localize people. And we're able to localize within 20 centimeter accuracy. Now that's pretty good because that's about the size of your foot. It's hard to localize better than that. And we're able to locate multiple occupants walking together at the same time, piece of paper, and also localize with obstacles. But what's more, we can actually get personal characteristics. Of course, identity, actually balance. When people walk, the balance of the ground reaction force, we can actually tell the difference. Health status, give you an idea how sensitive these sensors are, we're able to capture the heartbeat of a person sitting in a chair by putting a sensor a meter away on the floor. Your heart, when it beeps, it creates a vibration on the back of your chair. That vibration propagates through the leg of the chair to the floor, and these sensors can capture that and measure it. So all the vitals and all that stuff. Okay, so put it together, what do we get? Well, one of my students was actually a big fan of Harry Potter. So if you don't know what Harry Potter is, go talk to your kids. But Harry Potter is this magical thing. There's magical school in Harry Potter. Harry was given a map called the Marauder's Map, where you can see the name of the person as the person walk around Hogwarts or wherever. So that's what we did. So we put sensors on the floor. You see it near the cones. And we just have people walking around. You see the little footsteps that follow that person. Okay. And this is him stopping and walking back. Okay, I promise you I'll talk about what this can do for you, not what it can do for Harry Potter. So, but this basically shows the potential, right? We're able to build magic and create magical things in a sense. But what's actually perhaps one of the applications I'm most proud of is actually we're working with Nationwide Children's Hospital in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. And one of the things that our collaborator, a doctor we collaborate with, focuses on is these kids in the Amish community. In the Amish community, they have a really prevalent neuromuscular disease called limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. What it is that your muscle, when you exercise a lot, your muscle sometimes rips, and the next day you hurt, right? Your muscle hurts. Now, these kids with this disease, when your muscle hurt, it rebuilds, it becomes stronger. You have a stronger muscle. That's why we go exercising, get that muscle pain. These kids, when that muscle get hurt, it forms a scar tissue. It does not rebuild. So slowly that scar tissue builds up, and then eventually they can no longer move. Usually these kids, without treatment or with the wrong treatment, the life expectancy is about 20 years old. However, if we can determine who have this muscular dystrophy and put them on the right treatment or see the effective treatment, we can extend that from 20 to 30 years. Right? Imagine giving a kid 10 years of their life. Imagine giving a kid their 20s. Right? I would say that's the best years. So this is what we've been working with them. We actually were able to get the ability to walk, the speed of walking, of course, the heel toe motion. We can determine this, or in the timing between the two, the tiredness of the walker, and the balance of the walker, key metric they use for diagnosis. And we're actually able to correlate this with disease progress, the medication and falls. That one we haven't published yet, but we are working on it. And of course, we can inform doctors and caregiver about round-the-clock health status of the person. So let's see, one of the results that we recently have is this muscular dystrophy classification, namely healthy or unhealthy patients. So just based on the metric that we're able to get, and with doctors actually already making a diagnosis, we're actually able to get, with only the symptom features, we're actually able to get 86% accuracy in determine who has and who does not. And of course, if we combine these features, we can do better, up to 90% accuracy. But with the structural reduction that I talked about before, we're actually able to get 96% accuracy on classifying kids with muscular dystrophy and those who are not. And of course, kids is not the only thing. As the first picture you've seen of this talk, that's actually the one on the very left. The key advantage of this approach, structural sensor approach, is that it only relies on structural vibrations. And humans spend like 80% of their lifetime inside structures. And this does not require wear. It doesn't, it's always on, and it has a perceived privacy. If you leak a picture of me in the bathroom, I will be very unhappy and embarrassed. But if you leak a vibration signal of me, I don't think anyone will care. So some of the deployment we've done is one is the elder care home. We're actually able to get balanced fall risk prediction, not fall detection here. We can predict how likely are they to fall in the next 100 steps. Activity monitoring, recovery, and vital monitoring. We're also working with the Alzheimer's patients, trying to determine some Alzheimer's characteristic and in the future, hopefully diagnosis. We're actually, with the children, we're trying to do early detection and monitoring children with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, the result which you just seen. Children and elderly are very similar to pigs, I always say. Working with Beta Grow in Thailand, we couple years now, we actually looked at the pig activity monitoring using the structural vibration in order to monitor the pig health and for animal welfare purposes. And also in Thailand, working with Thai Bev, we're actually looking at autonomous shopping, warehouse monitoring, and these item identification using these approaches I just talked about. Okay, I think that's very close to the end of my time. But I have to mention that the stuff I presented is the work of a lot of people. My PhD students, current and past, they worked on this, and this is most of their contribution. And a lot of collaborators in different domains, departments, hospitals, industry, elder care, government, all coming together and making these things possible. And Thailand's very own Thai Bev and Beta Grow certainly help with that as well. And with that, I'll take any questions that you may have. This is a picture from one of our Beta Grow deployments. Those pigs don't seem particularly impressed with our work, but hopefully you liked it.
All right, so thank you very much for this
I don't know how to do the questions.
Yeah, so if any participants have any questions, please feel free to drop your question in the chat box, please. And our team will gather all the questions and I'll speak it out to our speaker. So while we are waiting for the questions from the participants, there is one participant drop off the question just now. AI seems to be too clever sometimes, and it can learn anything. Are there any issues that human beings shall be carefully concerned how to balance the privacy and benefits of using the AI? So could you please share and comment on this issue, please?
So, I'm not hearing any sound from you guys.
Sorry, let me repeat the question.
Hopefully you were able to hear me during the presentation.
Yes. It was perfectly well structured. So the question is, AI seems to be too clever and it can learn anything. Are there any issues that human beings shall be carefully concerned how to balance the privacy and benefits of using the AI?
I still don't hear anything. Hopefully it just me.
อาจารย์เหมือนไม่ได้ยิน All right, can you hear me now, Professor Zhang? Professor Zhang, can you hear me now?
Oh yes, we can hear you now.
Brilliant. All right, so sorry for any technical error that may cause inconvenience. So there's one question drop off from the participant just now. The question is, AI seems to be too clever. It can learn anything. Are there any issues that human beings shall be carefully concerned? How to balance the privacy and benefits of utilizing the AI? Could you please comment on this point, please?
I think that's a very good question. The privacy is certainly first and foremost in our minds. This is actually why we're working on vibration. Cameras, for example, audio, visual, those things have come with very high privacy concerns. Whereas for vibration, if you leak my vibration signature, okay. But if you leak a naked picture of me, I'm sorry, you don't want to see that, but I will be very embarrassed, right? So from the vibration end, I think that will be a much lower privacy concept. Now, with this technique also, only the people with the right models can discern the vibration information. So we actually, with the training, only with the people who are trained, we can actually get your health status, footstep status. So that naturally means that you will have to consent to actually get into it. So hopefully that reduce some of the privacy concerns.
Right. Thank you.
And
yeah. I think we still have plenty of time for questions. So please feel free to drop off any comments or questions or any concerns that you have during the presentation or the talk of Professor Zhang.
I'd like to think I've been super clear, so no one's asking questions.
Yeah, I think we're still a bit ahead of time for now. Yeah. All right. So if not, well, if you may have some questions later, so feel free to drop off your questions, and then our team will gather all the questions and send to Professor Zhang later, if that would be at your convenience.
There's a question. Sure, I can answer this question.
Yes, please.
For the Harry Potter invisible map, Marauder's map,
yeah.
Can you detect one person at a time, and can you identify which person is which? Yes. So from the identity, we can determine who's what, which person is which. We started with only able to do one person at a time because the signal is clearest that way. We were able to eventually expand that to multi-people. Now, actually, that's a very interesting paper we just recently published, is that we rely on two different facts. One, people who walk together, when you don't know each other well, you tend to disassociate your footsteps. When two people know each other very well, like mother and child, or like two lovers, for example, a couple, they tend to synchronize their steps. So when you're a couple, it's a little harder. So that's one thing. People tend not to walk synchronously. So when they're not synchronous, we can actually still separate the two people. When they are walking synchronously, we have multiple sensors. And the structure usually can be considered a linear system. So based on the similarity, occasionally you have some footsteps that's asynchronous. We can separate the footsteps based on those individual ones. And that one, we're able to do the identity up to about 90% accuracy when people are walking simultaneously. So yes, we can do multiple people for the Harry Potter maps.
Yeah. Well, I've got one question from myself, Professor Zhang, based on the Harry Potter's invisible map, this one. So in terms of application, do you think whether it would be quite suitable for the workers or the engineers who work for the underground train station or something, where they have quite, low reception for the mobile phones or any other devices that can detect the location or allocate the location of people? Would that be applicable for this kind of job, do you think?
I think for train stations or malls or places where there's a lot of people, what you could do is much more difficult to separate the people.
Right.
But what you could do is actually determine the activity level, mood of the people. Train comes in, how fast are people going, what are the moods, right? So those kind of things can certainly be determined. Another thing actually a colleague of mine is working on is actually looking at the train vibrations themselves to be able to understand, one, if the train is broken, maybe like a chip wheel or something, and two, the status of the track, like if the track is having some issues or too tight, too loose. And three, when you're driving on the bridge on the train, that induced vibration you can actually get the status, the natural response of the bridge as well.
Right. Thank you.
So you can actually, the application are humongous.
Yeah, thank you very much.